So today's lecture is based on a chapter by Michel Foucault called Panopticism, in which he studies the way that power shifted from medieval ages to capitalism. And he's looking particularly into how this power operates in society. What are the strategies, how we understand power. So the first thing to understand that it's not in the PowerPoint here would be that power is not a thing. I am not powerful because I have a lot of money, which I don't, but if I did, I would be powerful if I had a lot of money because this is something that other people want. So, in order for other people to get all the money that I have, they would get into connections with me, relationships with me that would make me powerful. Whether I give them this money or not, it's not so much the fact that I have something, but the fact that other people want that something. So Foucault looks at power mostly from the point of view of the relationship between people more than what stuff they have. So he looks at the different mechanisms that were used to distribute or to deal with power. So he says that in society, in Western societies, we went from what he calls a social quarantine to indefinitely generalizable mechanisms of panopticism. So what this means is that at some point, the way that people felt they would be safe was by freezing out, by totally ignoring or putting outside of perspective those bodies, those folks that we were not comfortable with. But that eventually that changed, and we started operating power in a way that has more to do with how we connect with each other than how we don't connect with each other. So he says that this new way of applying power, this panopticism, was created through enclosures, constant surveillance, and threat of punishment. And in this way, power infiltrated all of society. So this sort of like getting through all of society that power has, he calls that capillarity. Like something that just sort of like passes through and creates these enclosures, surveillance, and threats of punishment. So he says that this distribution of power, the way that we relate to each other through power, is infinite, that it never stops, and there's millions of ways in which we connect with each other. Another way of doing this is by pushing aside behaviors that we considered othered, whether because they are violent and we don't like that, or because they are the behaviors of women that need to be repressed, and we do that in certain ways. So we other certain behaviors. We call certain behaviors unacceptable. And finally, another big mechanism that happens is the hierarchies, right? At the same time that we set up these enclosures and we surveil and we threaten with punishment, we also create hierarchies in which some people are on top and some others are clearly at the bottom. So Foucault says that we studied all of this in Western societies during the plague. As you know, the plague was a horrendous thing that happened in Europe, and several times throughout the history of Europe in medieval ages, Europe almost didn't make it because so many people died. I think 1/3 of the population died during the plague. And the picture that I'm showing you here is a depiction of the mask that the doctors used when they went into a house that was considered stricken by plague. They would use these horrendous masks and put some herbs on the beak of the mask because they thought that they were getting the plague through the air, and if they could purify the air with these herbs, then they wouldn't get the plague. At this point, they were not aware that they were getting the plague because they were so not so little hygienic that they lived with horrendous amounts of rats, They had also killed most of the cats because they thought the cats were diabolic. So the rats had lots of fleas, and the fleas beat the rats, and then beat the people, and the rats that were infected, it would also then bite humans, and most of them would get really sick and for the most part died. So during the plague, families were locked up in their homes. When you had somebody who was sick, the whole family would be locked up in their homes, a confinement. And then people would come, sent by the government, certain people that were powerful also would come and knock at your door. So these were people who were free, connected with the higher ups, and who were not sick. You were sick, or somebody in your family was sick, so you had to remain indoors, and they would come and knock at your door, and you have to tell them the truth about life, health, and death on pain of death. So if somebody had died in your family during the time that you had been confined, you had to tell them. If somebody else had fallen sick, you had to tell them. And if you didn't, you could be put down because you were considered somebody who was endangering all of the population. So the relationship of each individual to her disease and to her death passed through the representatives of power. So there was a truth of your death, the truth of your disease, the truth of your health, and you had to pass on this information to those that represented power. So Foucault says power in this way is exercised through a division set by hierarchical figures, placing individuals under constant examination. So you were locked up, and power was exercised by the powerful by setting up different hierarchies. There were the town people, the officials of the town who were free, healthy, and could send other people to knock on your door. And you had to tell them everything about you, your truth. So he says that power treated the plague as a mixture. Everybody was together, they were getting too close to each other, and they would get all infected with this plague. So this mixture was countered with medical and military discipline that bring play into power by analyzing every detail of your truth, of your health, of your life, of your death. So this is what he calls a capillarity of power. You have these individuals that are placed on top, that have an amount of power that is pretty impressive. You have a population that is locked up and sick. And then you have these people that represent power that sort of like, deal down power to you. So although the king wasn't there, these folks that came knocking at your door, you better treat them as a king, because otherwise you would be put down because you were a traitor to humanity. So there was a true place for you. If you were sick, you were supposed to be locked up. If you were dead, you were supposed to be given up. Your body had to be given up to these people that were even lower than you, because these people were called the crows. They were also sent by power, but they were people sent by power to die, pretty much, because you would have to give them the bodies of those that had been stricken by the plague. So these people would probably die themselves. So there was a true place, a true body. The body was either sick and free, or stricken by plague and locked up, or dead and carried away and thrown out. And there was a true disease. Were you really sick or you were not really sick? But this truth about your health, about your body, about your place, wasn't a truth that you, the one locked inside the house, could attest to. This truth was said by this hierarchical organization of figures of power that declare that you were, actually alive or dead or whatever was going on with you. So this is the leper. So the plague was a more modern way of dealing with disease. The way that they dealt with the leprosy was different. As you can see, this person has something in their hand that makes noise, because they are supposed to make noise every time they engage or get close to people, so that everybody would know that they are impure, that they are sick. So then people would run away from them. And then they also have this other element in their hand, which is a bowl to beg for food. So the leper was like the counter of the plague, of the way of dealing with the plague. The leper was ostracized, was taken away from society. Is the ideal, Foucault says, of a pure society. So there's the othered, which would be the leopard, and then there's a confined, which would be the plague people. The leper was caught up in a practice of rejection, of exile enclosure, left to her doom as a mass with no differentiation. If you were a leper, they didn't want to know anything about you except that you were a leper. That was the true body of you, your true disease, determined by power, by the doctors that were sent by the powerful to look at you and determine that you were no longer fit to be part of our people, part of the world. So the sick of the plague were caught up in a meticulous tactical partitioning with individual differentiation through constricting effects of power. So this is different. The sick of the plague are partitioned, are put in places very, very clearly defined, with lots of knowledge of what's going on with them. They come and knock at your door every day to find out if you're alive or if you're dead, if somebody else got sick, if everybody's okay, what's going on in that house. So there's a very highly individualized differentiation in the roles that people had. Some were caught and confined. Others were sent to find out. Others were sent to die, were sacrificed in the hopes that other people would be saved by getting rid of these bodies. So there's hierarchy here, there's partitioning, and there's a very meticulous way of finding out what's going on with people. So power and knowledge, right? Here they come together. So with the leper, we see separation. And with the plague, we see segmentation. One thing is to throw a whole piece of the population out because they're sick, and another one is to confine them, find out about them, investigate them, research them, come out with their truth, come up with ways of helping them or keeping them away if they're too sick. So the leper is marked, Foucault says, and the plague is analyzed and distributed power. The leper is marked by power, and the plague sick is analyzed and distributed. Those bodies are analyzed. How sick are they? How close to being sick are they? If they were in contact with other people that were sick. And then they're distributed based on that. If they're alive, they're kept in that house, alive but still under the plague, and if they died, they are carried away and thrown out. So Foucault says that the idea of creating a leper is the idea of a pure community, where you can control everything that's going on there, and some people are pure and the impure are thrown out. With the plague, the ideal is of a disciplined society, a society disciplined by hierarchies, with constant surveillance, observations taken down in writing. Is the utopia of a perfectly governed city. So Foucault is putting here together this idea of government, surveillance, hierarchy, observation, and power. And power and knowledge for him are two things that go very closely together. So he says that the West has created a binary division and has created also a process of branding. So we are either mad or we are sane, we are either dangerous or we are harmless, we are either normal or abnormal. And this is a big deal for Foucault. How do we create or determine normality. And is normality normal, or is it just common? Many of us think, that heterosexuality is not normal, it's just common. We are not heteros because that's a normal way of a human being. It's just a common way. And maybe we are not heteros. Maybe we were just told somehow through the subtle mechanisms of power that being normal is preferably to being abnormal. And since sexuality is considered normal when it's hetero, then we make a big effort to be normal, because if we are not normal, then we are thrown out, we are branded, we are considered different, we are not granted the same opportunities because of all these hierarchies, partitioning, surveillance, and knowledge that is built on us. So he says that this binary divisions and these brandings is a result of a whole set of techniques and institutions devoted to measuring, supervising, and correcting the abnormal through disciplinary mechanisms originated during the plague. So again, who's normal? Who determines who's normal? Those who have power, because the ones who have power have the ability to create truth about you through the different disciplines, through the different sciences, through all those mechanisms that they started using during the plague to get to know each individual in a very detailed way, so that they can determine on which side you're going to fall. Are you going to be kept in the happy sort of realm of the normal, or are you going to be thrown out and branded as abnormal? So he says that Bentham's Panopticon, Bentham was the guy that invented the Panopticon to be used in prisons, is the architectural figure of this kind of power. Because we have this tower in the center, in the most important part of the prison, where there's somebody, we think, that is constantly observing us and will determine our truth, whether we are doing okay and we can stay in our individual little comfy cells, or whether we are being obnoxious and we have to be, somehow thrown out of that cell and be placed in a different space where the hierarchy is going to be even worse for us, where we are separated by other bodies through this partitioning. So he says it doesn't really matter whether the guard is there or not. It's the perfect system for surveillance, because we always think that there could be somebody there. And this somebody has been imbued with a power that we haven't, so they have the power to create a truth about us that would later on render us even lower down on the hierarchy and in a worse partition than before. So when we are in prison under the Panopticon, we are always visible by power. There's an illusion of constant surveillance and a separation of bodies. We are seen, but we are not seeing. So there's a huge power differential here. If we take this to, Western society, US society, we can think about all these surveillance techniques that governments use on us and realize that we don't know what they are doing. We think that because we have C-SPAN and we can see what they are doing in Congress when they all meet together and talk in public, we know what they are doing. But in reality, most probably there's tons of meetings behind the scenes that we never get to see. We never get to see exactly how these people live. We never get to see what they consume, what they don't consume. They know all about us, though, because they have the surveillance programs. They know all of this. And apart from the surveillance programs directly run by the government, we are also constantly surveilled by other forces in capitalism, when we buy stuff, when we don't buy stuff, when we go online, when we don't go online, when we travel using our GPS, etc., etc., etc. So we are always, always visible by power, whether it's political power, of the economic power, of capitalism, but we don't know what power and the powerful are doing. We are always seen, but we do not see. So Foucault emphasizes this idea that power is an arrangement. It's not, again, my possession of a lot of money. It's the arrangement that allow me, in the first case, to be in possession of a lot of money. And then the fact that so many people need this money from me that they are going to have to get into some sort of connection with me and will have to play with me. This is the power that I would have if I had all this money. So power's principle is not so much in one person, but in an array of techniques, distribution of bodies that causes dissymmetry, disequilibrium, and difference. So when we decide that people of color are meant to live certain lives, hetero people are meant to live a certain kind of life that people who have what we call in Argentina dissident sexualities are not meant to live, when we think that men should have certain kinds of jobs, etc., etc., etc. All of those are different ways, different techniques in which our bodies are distributed, causing dissymmetry, lack of equilibrium, and differences amongst us. So he says, outside of prison, the technique of the Panopticon allows to observe and control the sick in hospitals, children in schools, and the workers. So he says this is a polyvalent mode of power. The power of the Panopticon can be deployed in many different situations. It's not just an arrangement that works in a prison. It works wonderful in schools. It works wonderful to constantly control workers, to control the sick in the hospitals, etc. So again, when Foucault was writing this stuff, we didn't have the webcams and all the stuff that is surveilling us now. So this idea of power as a panopticon, or power using the technique of the panopticon to control and to know us, has really taken off, at this point. So he talks about distributions of bodies, hierarchical organization of these bodies with the aim of strengthening the social forces, to increase production, to develop the economy, to spread education, to raise public morality, to increase and multiply. Our sexuality, right, is also very much at stake. Our reproduction is at stake here, and we are constantly being controlled, whether it is to make us work more, or to increase production, or to develop the economy, or to educate us in certain ways. Clearly, we are parts of power, and what Foucault's not saying here, but we should reflect on, is that once we are subjectified by power, we become part of that capillarity of power, and we allow for this power to go through us, and we employ the same mechanisms that we are critiquing here right now. I myself employ those mechanisms when I'm teaching class, when I'm trying to understand different students. I try not to cause dissymmetry. I try not to distribute bodies in the wrong way, but this is just a try. Eventually, I have to dish out grades. And by dishing out grades, that's the way that I threaten with violence when students don't perform in the way that the university expects them to perform. So reflect on how do you allow for the capillarity of power to exist in your own everyday lives. It's not just when you have a lot of power, it's also just in our individual relationships when we try to make others tote the line of heteronormativity, racism, sexism, etc., etc., etc. So Foucault talks about a disciplinary society rather than a punishing society. That would have been probably the medieval society, in which power was mostly dished on you in a negative way, in the sense, well, if you don't do this, I'm going to kill you, or if you do this, I'm going to kill you. Here, the idea is more to discipline society so that we all learn how to be good subjects, and there's not so much need to torture us in front of other people as an example. Because if I don't discipline myself, instead of being tortured, what's going to happen is I'm going to lose my job, probably. if I lose my job because I don't apply the capillarity of power to you all in an efficient way, that's a huge discipline measure for me. So I will make sure that I will apply that capillarity of power, that I will make you jump through the hoops that I have to make you jump through the hoops, so that at the end of my life, I won't be very hungry and I won't be one of those people that are placed at the lower bottom of the hierarchy. I'm trying to get my body placed in a way that I won't feel too much of a backlash from power in the years to come. So he talks about a shift from exceptional discipline to generalized surveillance through extension of mechanisms of discipline throughout the 17th century and beyond. So the beginning of capitalism, no? A shift from exceptional discipline. We don't torture people in public anymore. When we do, we try to be quiet about it. When people find out, we try to justify it. But it's not something that we normally do to impose discipline on society. We mostly impose discipline in society through these generalized surveillance mechanisms that started in the 17th century. So if we think about the social contract that we started talking about at the beginning of ages, at the beginning of this semester, when we talk about classic liberalism, we talked about these thinkers that thought that we all got together at some point and decided we don't want to be savages anymore. The state of nature didn't work for us for whatever reason. So now we become truly civilized people. He says, well, we got to think about this social contract and the Panopticon. How did one and the other work together? So the contract can be regarded as the ideal foundation of law and political power. That's what these thinkers were telling us. And we can think of the Panopticism as a technique of coercion, of disciplining, of understanding, of applying power to this foundation of society. So at the same time that the Enlightenment created all these liberties for human beings, the rights that we talk about now, the rights that Rousseau and Hobbes and Locke talked about, even the rights that Olympe de Gouges talked about for women, all these liberties also at the same time come hand in hand with the disciplines. All these techniques, all these sciences that we've created to get to know the individual, to understand the individual, so that when we apply certain techniques, we get good results. Think about, for example, how if you stop smoking, you will be considered a very healthy individual. If you don't stop smoking, you can't even smoke on campus, not even outdoors nowadays, because we think that you are not disciplined, that you need to just, get a hold of yourself. And if you cannot do it on your own, then we have the medical sciences that will help you. They will give you a patch. They will talk you. There will be a psychiatrist. If you cannot give up, there will be a psychiatrist who will talk with you and give you drugs and get you to stop smoking, because all of a sudden we have to all stop smoking. This is the big discipline that we are being dished, that we are being applied right now. So in order for me to know how to better apply that discipline, I need to know about you. And I know about you through the sciences that were created at this point, the medical sciences, the psychiatry sciences, and everything else really that contributes to people behaving properly, so that we understand, and through that proper behavior, we can assess what is their true nature. Once we assess their true nature, we can place them in a certain way in the hierarchy of society, because we have knowledge about them, which gives us the power to determine whether they are fit to be free individuals and receive all of the benefits that the norms receive in society, or whether they have to be, removed from our company, their bodies locked up somewhere, their bodies placed in a different hierarchy, one that is way lower than the one that I'm trying to occupy, by dishing all this power of the academy on you. And here's the Panopticon, the horrendous building where the guard could see all the bodies that were enslaved in this prison.